Hey everybody, welcome to an Electrom training video. Today we're going to be talking about how to align your disc brake lever so that it is in the right position for brake bleeding. Before I do this, let's go over some of the basic principles of the hydraulic disc brakes that are on the Electrom. The Electrom is using a standard Shimano clone hydraulic disc brake. This means it uses mineral oil, and this means it's actually quite easy to bleed. And now we say this word bleed. What does that mean? What that means is a hydraulic disc brake uses hydraulic fluid to transmit the force from your brake lever down to the brake calipers and thereby squeeze the brake lever. Sometimes the hydraulic fluid gets air bubbles in it, and as well, over time, the hydraulic fluid slowly, ever so slowly, dissipates out of the system, and it needs to be topped up. And so anyone who's ridden a mountain bike or now modern road bikes is relatively used to this concept of having to bleed their brakes. And pretty simple principle, which is you want to bleed the brakes pushing fluid in from the lowest point up to the highest point, because the air bubbles will rise through the system, and so we want the fluid to be pushed up that way so that the natural force will push all the air bubbles up and out of the system. Now, I am not going to cover in this video how to actually bleed your brakes. I will include some links at the end, or right now perhaps, that will show you where to go to view great videos on how to bleed disc brakes. There's no point in me repeating that. Park Tools and a number of other companies already make great videos, so you can check that out there. What I'm going to show you is how to set up the specific position on the Electrom so that you can bleed your brakes without having to remove brake levers and such. So before we get started, I also want to show you the equipment that will be used. Basic set of Allen keys are needed, and then a bleed kit. And this is a bleed kit that just arrived in the mail online. It's a universal bleed kit, and it consists of a bunch of little blocks, some hoses, various fittings to fit various brakes, and then hydraulic, syringes to push the hydraulic fluid. And then the final most key point is in this baggie here, we have the receiver cup, which is where the excess fluid ends up when we bleed the brakes. So some videos that you'll come across will show this being done with 2 syringes. Some will show it being done with a syringe and a receiver cup. I like to use a receiver cup, but it's entirely up to you and whichever video you choose. Okay, let's get to it. Now I'm going to be demonstrating the actions you would take to bleed the front brakes. They're basically the same for the rear brake. Couple of key things. You must never, ever, ever get hydraulic fluid on your brake pads or on your brake rotor, which is mounted to your wheel. And for this reason, we take the disc brake caliper off of its mount. So if it's on the back, we'll take it off of the rear swing arm, and if it's on the front, we'll take it off of the front fork so that we can move it away from the disc brake rotor, which is mounted to the wheel. And then we will take the pads out so that we can make sure that when we're topping it up with fluid, they don't get moisture on them or fluid on them, because that it never comes out and it really destroys the functionality of your brakes. So to start out, I will use my Allen key set, and I will undo the front brake caliper. And I've already removed the front wheel on this bike. Well, actually, I haven't even put the front wheel on. This is an unbuilt chassis. You always want to keep track of whichever parts you take off, so I'm going to place mine right here. Then, this is the brake caliper, and I will need a set of needle nose pliers or other small pliers in order to remove the cotter pin that will allow me to take the pads out. And to do this, I'm bending the cotter pin back to a flat position. You can reuse these cotter pins a number of times. But eventually, after bending back and forth a bunch of times, eventually you may find you have to replace the cotter pin. Cotter pin goes with my other parts. Now this part is crucial. My hands are clean because I just washed them, but I'm pulling the spacer out here. I want to be very careful not to touch the brake pads, the surface of the brake pads with my hands, because there may be a little bit of contamination on them. So I will push the pads out from the back and I will pinch them on the outside. So I'm holding the outside of the pad, and as you can see in here, there's a return spring and a set of pads. I'll put these over here. And so now my caliper is hanging loose. It's away from my front wheel, so there would not be any fluid getting onto the front wheel rotor, and the pads are off, so there won't be any fluid getting onto the pads. Now it's just a question of putting the handlebar into the position we need it to be in order to bleed the brakes. And what's going on here is we're using on the Electrom, we are using standard mountain bike disc brakes on our handlebar, but our handlebar is upright. And these brakes, their fill and bleed port is here. It is meant to be done with the brakes in a horizontal position because that's the position they would normally be on a mountain bike. So how to achieve this position? It's fairly simple. We will loosen off some pinch bolts on our stem and swing the stem forward so that we're horizontal. I'll give it a slight upward tilt, and I'll just tighten one bolt down so that it doesn't move around on me. Then I will loosen off the clamp bolts for the lever. I've already loosened the handguard blocks so that they will move as well. And that allows me to bring the brake lever up into a horizontal position. And I don't know if you can see that with the handguard in the way, but this is basically what we're looking for. We're now ready to attach our bleed cup onto the lever and our syringe onto the caliper and bleed the brakes. Once you're done bleeding your brakes, you basically do the opposite of what we've done. We put the handlebar back into the upright position, and we will put the caliper back on after we've remounted the disc brakes. Once you've completed your disc brake bleed, you'll do the opposite of what we've just done. We will swing the handlebar back up into its upright position and lock it down. And we will put our brake pads back on. We'll clean our hands before we touch those brake pads, just to make sure that if we got any brake fluid on our fingers, that we don't pass it on to the pads. And then we will remount the caliper onto the fork, and with the wheel in place, that will allow us to line up the disc brake at the time. And as well, I will cover how to align disc brakes in a future video. So that's it for how to set up your Electrom for bleeding disc brakes. And as I said, at the end of the video, you will see some links for videos that I like that go over how to bleed disc brakes. Thanks for watching.